Welcome back to the Garibaldi Red podcast. I'm your host, Max Hayes. Oh, that's the problem when you read off a script. I am your interim host, Mark Turner. Most of you will know me as a contributor to this podcast. But Max is errant this week. He's off, I think he's off on a journalistic course. I think he's learning how to stick a microphone under somebody's face after they just scored a hat trick in a cup final and asked them those incredible words, "How do you feel?" So hopefully Max's course is coming along nicely and he's going to return to England ready to hit players with those hard-hitting questions. In the meantime, I am delighted to say I'm joined by Max Scott of TalkSport fame, and he and I will be running this episode today. And so hopefully we don't run it off the tracks. Good morning, Max.
Morning. You all right, mate?
I'm all right. Well, I guess it's afternoon there, right? We also have the distinction of not only this being the first podcast not hosted by Max Hayes, but I'm hosting it here in the United States too, coming at you from Colorado Springs, Colorado. So it is the early hours of the morning there. You're not in your usual spot either. Tell folks where you are today.
Yeah, I'm in Cornwall on a family holiday. So questioning Max's dedication to the Garibaldi cause, because he, for some reason, is in some 5-star resort in Turkey, but they don't have Wi-Fi for him to pop online for 20 minutes. So, but I obviously can here in Cornwall. And surprisingly, the weather's been really nice, actually. So just come back from the beach and looking forward to talking about Forest.
Fantastic. Yeah. I know Max is at a beach club right now. I got a text from him just a few minutes ago. So yeah, I also speculate they have Wi-Fi as well. The meat of this episode, Max, as you know, is going to be us speculating about what the starting 11 could be for Nottingham Forest on the season opening game at the City Ground, 3:00 on August the 17th, of course, against Bournemouth. And I want to stress here, well, I don't know how you've come at this, Max, but I wanted to stress that these are our starting 11s. This is what we would favour. You might have come at it from the angle of, well, this is what you think Nuno's going to do. So we'll get on to that here in just a moment. But certainly my 11 is the 11 I would pick, a mix of head and heart, but a team that I think would stand up against Bournemouth. How have you approached it?
Yeah, I think I've approached it in the sense that the team I would pick, so like you, head and heart, and what I would like to see. Obviously, every fan's got their own opinion, and lots of people would disagree. I think it's probably similar to Nuno. I think there's maybe one player that I don't think Nuno will start, but looking forward to getting into that, because obviously it's been an interesting summer for Forest. We've all been delighted with the fact that we've been able to keep Gibbs White and Murillo and seemingly stay within PSR breaches. Of course, that remains to be completely seen. We'll find out later in the season, but it looks like we are going to be safe of that. And so, I think there's a lot more optimism, certainly from my perspective, going into the new season, that there isn't really going to be much of a hangover. I'm really pleased. I've said it before that we've kept Nuno Espirito Santo. I just think we need that consistency. And so going into a new season, it really feels like a fresh start, really feels like a season that we can build on and establish ourselves as sort of a solid Premier League side. And where that is, I think as long as we're not in a relegation scrap, I think we're well set to not be in a relegation scrap, and that is just the sort of the baby steps that we need, I think, as a club.
Yeah, Max Hayes, I think it's speculated on a previous pod, he thought Forest were coming around 12th. Are you of a similar mind?
I mean, I'd be delighted with 12th, Mark. I mean, I think even just looking at the likes of Brentford last season, they came just one place above us, and for most of the season they looked safe, or for most of the season they looked like they were going to be all right. And there was a few occasions where maybe they'd be dragged in, but they were only 5th bottom. I maybe think 12th is slightly optimistic, but there's nothing wrong with optimism. I would say I'd be happy with 14th, 15th, really, because I think when you look at the stature of some of the clubs and the financial might behind some of the clubs and the quality in some of the clubs, I think 15th would be really solid, Mark. But anything above that, I think it'd be an absolutely fantastic season.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. 14th, 15th. I just like to see daylight between 15th and 17th.
Yes, yeah,
it'd be nice.
Not to have like a wide relegation fight. What you want is the 3 clubs that have come up, and then maybe one other team that's going to struggle. And I do think that Brentford will struggle. I know that Ivan Toney's still there, but I think it's likely that he will get snapped up, because otherwise Brentford are going to sell one of their most prized possessions for free in a year. And I think he'll be pushing for a move. I think he looks well suited, I think, to Spurs. I think they need a goal scorer, someone ruthless up top, and he'll be dying for a move like that. And so I think without Ivan Toney, which I suspect come the end of the window, he won't be a Brentford player, I think they are going to struggle. And so... And then you look at Leicester, not to mention the fact that I find it agonising that Steve Cooper is their manager. And no doubt I think he'll do well. They've signed some good players, but they are going to be struggling with PSR. I think they're really at risk of getting some points. And so that obviously helps Forest. I think the three teams that are always going to struggle, the ones that have come up, I think you're looking at Brentford, as the four teams that are going to be in it. Hopefully that, and then the rest of us can just always maybe have that 4-5 point gap, 3 minimum. That would be cozy, wouldn't it? But somehow, I don't think it's just going to be quite that simple.
Yeah, probably not. It's Nottingham Forest, so probably not.
Right.
But I think this team does have the potential even to be a little higher. I don't think Max Hayes is shooting for the moon at 12th. I think, judging by what we have with this squad, and particularly with the potential introduction of another forward and the goals that come with that, that could very well be within our capability. But I guess time will tell.
I think the big challenge, Mark, is how do we become not just a counter-attacking side? Obviously, the pace of Alanga, the sort of dynamism of Gibbs-White, Callum Hudson-Odoi is fantastic on the ball. They've got that, but I just don't know if we're able, quite at a point, I think we can be, but our challenge is going to be becoming a side that's confident in possession and can really dominate long periods of the game in possession against sides of our ilk and slightly better. You're always going to, have to batten down the hatches against your top six. So and that's fine. That's just the Premier League. That's the way it's become. There is this huge chasm between the top 6 and 7, maybe 8, and the rest of the league. And I just think that what we've got to do is to really establish a way of playing against the rest of the sides where we look like where we're capable and we're confident. And there were portions of that Villarreal game that I thought we looked like we were growing in that area, but it wasn't sustained enough. And so it is going to be a journey. We're never going to be the finished article at the end of pre-season and blow teams away in the first few months. But really, what Nuno will probably want to do is to really have that Wolves blueprint. He qualified for Europe with them, so he's clearly capable of doing that. And I do think that he's got the players. But our challenge is going to be, can we become confident as a Premier League side? Can we have that, that bit of Morgan Gibbs-White swagger across the rest of the team, that Murillo swagger, with that bit of nous as well? It's a really delicate balancing act, isn't it? Because I think you can lose confidence quite quickly in the Premier League, and we've seen Forest do that. I think it's possible, but it's not going to happen straight away.
Yeah, as the aforementioned Leicester demonstrated a few seasons back, momentum can be really key in their unlikely Premier League champion title push. And we've seen evidence of that from other teams as well. Momentum is such a key component, confidence as well. Hopefully Forest start well and begin building that confidence early, with the exception of the Liverpool game. Obviously, the first 5 matches all appear winnable on paper, but as the legendary Brian Clough once said, you don't play games on paper.
Exactly, yeah.
In the grass. So,
and then, of course, it's if we didn't get those points, Mark, that we hope we get, and there should be no, there's no divine right. There should be no entitlement from fans to think, well, we should be doing this. We finished 4th bottom last season, and we really struggled.
Yeah.
But I just worry that, with an owner that seems to be certainly has a track record of hiring and firing, and that he's been a lot more patient at Forest because of the fans, and I think the landscape's slightly different in the Premier League. But if we don't get, if we get trounced by some of those sides that we think we can get points from and win, then we could have a new manager in October, and you're sort of thinking, well, the whole feeling of stability that we have might be a bit of a veil come October. Of course, I hope that's not the case, but I think we need to be aware anything can happen.
Yeah, you bring up a great point as well, which is we're sitting here speculating about where we think Forest are going to end up. Where we think Forest are going to end up really is the least important thing. It's the blueprint within inside the club that's critical and is going to guide everything. And like you said, Marinakis certainly has a track record of, if that blueprint isn't being followed and he's not seeing the results he expects, changes being made. Speaking of players with confidence and a little pomp about them, let's just talk for a quick minute or two about the latest transfer rumour. I mentioned earlier Forest probably need another striker, need a few extra goals in the squad. Those could potentially be provided by the wonderfully named Santiago Jimenez, a Mexican international striker, currently plying his trade with Feyenoord in the Dutch league. Played actually for the now Liverpool manager, Arne Slot, for the last couple of seasons. Has a very good record. Last season, 23 goals, 6 assists. He's only 23 years old, but he's already made his mark in Liga MX in Mexico, and then again with Feyenoord in Holland. His contract runs through to, I think it's 2027, so he would require quite a chunk of change to pry him away from Holland and bring him to the City ground. Speculation in the region of somewhere between 30 to 40 million quid. That would be problematic for Forest, obviously, because of the PSR situation, and probably suggest they need to sell somebody else before the transfer window closes. So a lot for you to kind of delve into there, Max. But first and foremost, I'm assuming you agree with me that Forest could do with some additional firepower. Is this fella a possible solution?
Well, I mean, he's consistently scored goals for the past 2 seasons, 51 goals, 87 appearances, I think. And for a striker like that, at that age, of that stature, with a lot of talk around him, then for him, he's going to be pushing for a move to the Premier League. We're not the only club that's interested. Right. There's clubs all over Europe that will be vying for his signature, but there's no doubt that the Marinakis family have real success in bringing players in that, people suspect would go to so-called bigger clubs. I think about Sangare, and whilst that has not been a successful signing, the likes of PSG were in for him. Some sort of top Premier League clubs were reportedly interested, and we managed to get him. And so it's great that we have that sort of that ability at the club to convince people to come. It would be a good step for his career to come to a club like Forest, because he's going to get playing time. He's not going to sit on the bench for too long. Having said that, Taiwo, when he's fit, has been a great servant for Forest, and Chris Wood is a huge leader in the dressing room, massively respected by the entire squad, and a real key component to the culture that's being built post Steve Cooper. And has scored absolutely vital goals like Taiwo did. And so I think he would be in good company coming into the Forest dressing room. The first question for me, though, is it financially viable for Forest to do that, or is it a massive risk? I would only want to see them spend 30 to 40 million quid if we could offload a player. And of course, the question mark is who? Who are you? Who is going to make you a big enough dent so that your books are balanced? What I don't want Forest to be doing is to make a big cash signing like that, and then feel that they're flapping around, knowing with the buying clubs, knowing that they can ask for lower fees from us because we're desperate to get rid. I'm hopeful that the club have learnt their lessons, and they're not going to be playing hard and fast. So really, there's two things. I think it would be a really good signing, Mark, but they need to do it really carefully, and they need to do it wisely, and not shoot from the hip as they have done constantly since we got promoted, essentially. What do you think?
Oh, well, I don't know what you're worried about. I mean, if they can get 20 million for Ollie, they can get 30 million for Matt Turner. So I think transfer fee, and we're good to go.
And I think actually Matt Turner, he's got good international pedigree. You live over there in the States. I'm sure that there are, perhaps Saudi clubs, or sort of clubs in Europe that would. Matt Turner's not a bad goalkeeper, and I know he gets a lot of flack. But I think he's got a little bit of development to do.
Yeah, this rumours coming out that the Bundesliga, a couple of Bundesliga clubs are looking at him. That'd be a good pickup, I think.
Yeah, and I think, he deserves it. I think he's done nothing but try his hardest. There's been not an ounce of sulking. He seems like a real team player, and it must be incredibly difficult that all of the goalkeepers have been signed after him have been given a chance. And so I wish the best for him, but if we can make some money from him, then that'd be great. But going back to Jimenez, I think it would be a really, really good signing, because the reality is Taiwo is inconsistent fitness-wise. He seems to take a run of games to really get going anyway. So even if he is fit, it's going to take a while. Chris Wood is trustworthy, but it'd be good to have a young striker that really wants to make his trade and has, he's scoring goals. Yes, it's the Dutch league, but you shouldn't turn your nose up at it. He scored 51 goals in 2 seasons. That's prolific.
Yeah.
So if it can be done, then I think it's a really good signing, because strikers that score goals are a really rare commodity, and he can score goals. So let's see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, I like the age profile as well, but to your point, in order to cover that transfer fee, we'd have to get rid of one of our crown jewels, and it seems ridiculous to bring in additional goals only to lose the pipeline to those goals by selling Morgan Gibbs-White or conceding more goals at the back, because we've got Murillo to accommodate the transfers. So we'll see where things go. It's early days right now, and this isn't the first transfer rumours we've heard this season that have come to naught. So we'll see what pans out. In regards to Matt Turner, Turners are great. That's all I have to say about that. All right, let's turn our attention to our proposed starting 11 again for that season opener on August the 17th against Bournemouth. A winnable game, you'd argue, but Bournemouth have been rather a bogey team for us these past few seasons.
And Andoni Iraola's been incredibly impressive, Mark. I remember, so I lived in Bournemouth for 8-9 years, and so although I love Bournemouth, the place, the team just frustrate me, because they've always been more successful essentially than Forest while I lived there. And like you say, they're a bogey team. But I remember watching them last season when they were in the bottom 3 for the first couple of months. And every time I watched them, I still thought they looked quite impressive, and they were just a couple of cogs away. And I'm so impressed by how Iraola has sort of made them just sort of look like a really comfortable, threatening Premier League side. And I know that they sort of came to a little bit of a dull end to the season, but they're no pushovers, and our track record against them is really poor. So I do think we can beat them, but there should be no expectancy from fans. We're going to have to work hard for it. The last game at the City Ground was when Willy Bolly got that absolutely woeful red card that was never a red card. And so I feel like we deserve a bit of the rub of the green. Even that promotion season, Mark, when if we beat them towards the end of the season, we would have been in prime position for automatic promotion. Of course, it all worked out magically anyway. But the referee apologised to Steve Cooper straight after the game for not giving Sam Surridge a stonewall penalty when it was 0-0. So I feel like we just deserve a little bit of luck. We deserve some luck against Bournemouth.
Well, now that you've told fans not to expect anything and temper their expectations, I'm quite sure they're going to do that, Max.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They'll listen.
All right, so let's jump into our starting 11s. As I said at the top of the pod, mine is certainly predicated on who I would like to see, not necessarily who Nuno will pick. So let's rattle through these. But before we do, we have a caller. A young Maxwell Hayes, apparently calling into the show, has a comment he'd like to make. Dan, roll the tape.
Hello, Max and Mark from a 35-degree Turkey, absolutely sweltering in this heat. First of all, thanks for stepping in and doing the podcast for us. I won't go through my starting 11 because we might be here a while, which I know you guys are going to be touching on today. But just wanted to say, I've got a good feeling about this season. I predicted 12th when we did some stuff the other week. I'm sticking by it. I think Chris Wood is going to win the Ballon d'Or. No, I'm only joking, but honestly, Chris Wood might be one of those players again this season. And we've been linked with lots more, and I cannot wait to see as well that partnership between Murillo and Milenkovic. So from a very sunny Turkey, thanks for stepping in for the podcast. I'll see you next week. Come on, you Reds.
There you go, all the way from sunny Turkey. And he almost looks like he's ready to start shaving.
Yeah, I thought that. He had like a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow. I think that was just the shade. He's definitely angled himself to look like he's got a beard, hasn't he, there? Sort of found the right angle. But
I think crayons out, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Well, thanks, Max. We appreciate. Actually, we don't appreciate that at all. Like the ocean.
No, rubbing it in, mate.
I mean, seriously.
Oh, I can't do the podcast.
All right, so let's start with goalkeepers. So essentially, we have one of 3 to choose from. The aforementioned Matt Turner, Carlos Miguel, and Matt Salles. Of course, who would you start with between the pipes on the opening day?
I'd start with Matt Sells. I think international pedigree really didn't put a foot wrong. I don't think that when you look at our track record at set pieces, it's the goalkeeper's fault. I think that's organisation at the back. I think he's a leader. He looks assertive. And I think to start the season, it should certainly be him. But it's great that we've got Carlos Miguel, that imposing figure that I could imagine, if we're protecting a 1-goal lead, maybe Nuno would bring him on because he's just, no one's going to beat him to the ball if he can get to a cross. So, but yeah, I'd start with Sells. What about you?
Absolutely the same. And I'm thinking, if we're 1-0 down, you might want to bring on Miguel to throw him up if we get a corner, because no one's going to beat him to a header in the box. So that could be a nice option. But no, I'm with you for all the reasons you said. I don't think Matt Sells did very much wrong this last season. In fact, if anything, he was really one of the most critical components to steadying the ship and keeping us up.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It's been on Murillo and Wood and MGW and so on. And the fleeting performances we saw from Cho and we saw from Malanga, all of whom contributed. But I think Sells went somewhat under the radar and deserves that number 1 shirt opening day. So I will jump in with the back 4 and then see what your take is on this. In fact, we'll break this up a little bit. Let's go with the central defensive partnership to begin with. Young Mr. Hayes, already mentioned them. I can't deviate from this. I would love to see. Well, let me back up. I think there are going to be times where it's going to make sense to have 3 central defenders.
Yeah.
Matches, in which case I would love to see Willy Bolly tuck in between the 2 centre-backs I'd like to see start against Bournemouth. So flat back 4 with our 2 centre-backs being Murillo and Milenkovic. What's your take?
Yes. Aina, Milenkovic, Murillo and Williams. That is what you said, wasn't it?
I didn't give the fullbacks, but that's okay. We can jump in there.
Sorry.
No, you're
sorry.
good.
I'm slightly distracted because I can hear my niece and nephew sort of slowly getting louder and louder as they've arrived back from the beach. I've just sent them a message saying, "Don't come in." But no. Sorry. Yeah, it's got to be Murillo and Milenkovic. I was super impressed, Mark, at Villarreal. Just with how solid he looked, reading the game really well. I think he adds that little bit of maturity that Murillo is yet to garner. I think it could be a really promising partnership. Let's hope they stay fit. But what a great signing from the club. So that's who I'm going at centre back. Yeah, I'd agree. And then obviously I've given away I've gone for 4 at the back. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, so you mentioned Aina on the one side, Nico Williams on the other.
Yes.
The lesser famous Nico Williams on the other.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely, mate. Nailed on. Now, I mean, there are other options at fullback. Obviously, we've got Silva Moreira, who apparently can play everywhere. I think he's a utility player and evidently has played at least 3 different positions in his previous teams. Of course, Omar Richards as well, making a comeback, which I think astonished everybody in pre-season. And then Harry Toffolo, a fan's favourite, but probably not a starting pick for that opening game. So I'm with you. I would go Williams, Murillo, Milenkovic, and Aina.
Well, I mean, I think that we've got good backup. What I would say is just watching, and this is one pre-season game, so I'm sort of not casting huge aspersions, but going forward, Williams and Aina looked good, but there were a couple of times where they were just caught in behind. Aina looked sloppy a little bit, and I just, it's pre-season, but I'm sure hopefully they'll snap out of that. But there were just moments where I thought we would get punished in the Premier League for that if it wasn't a pre-season game. But I think they're certainly our strongest players. But everybody needs to improve, them included. Despite the fact they were really important, I think, particularly attacking wise. I've been really impressed with Nico Williams, how he's getting forward and beating players. Aina can do that naturally. He's so quick and skillful. Arguably he could be a winger at times. He looks so graceful on the ball. But I just think I think they've got to, if they're going to be playing in that bombing forward, they really need to work out their sort of phases of playing transitions and being really tight when they're defending, because they were caught out a couple of times against Villarreal. But that's just a snapshot, isn't it?
Good observation. Yeah, good observation. Well, I mentioned Bolly already, who, again, I'd be happy to see tucked in between either of those centre-backs or partnering either as well. I think his experience is key. Sadly, it looks like Joe Worrell probably is not going to play any part in the season again this year. We do need to mention, though, if we can say it, I need to mention it, Andrew Amabomadeli. He showed up a couple of times last year. Should he not also be in consideration?
Yeah, not for a starting 11 with the current talent that we've got, but I think again a little bit like if we did sign that Jimenez, I think Omobamidele, his Forest career got off to a little bit of a slow start, but I think that he really did show up, and he really he made a couple of mistakes, but he's young. But I think he looks like a leader, and he looks like someone. I've heard him speak, after games and stuff, and I just think he's got a real good head on his shoulders. He takes responsibility, takes accountability, and I think alongside Bolly, with the experience of Bolly and Milenkovic and the class of Murillo, I think he's only going to improve. And it wouldn't surprise me, if by the end of the season, if we did settle on a back three, that Willy Bolly might hand the baton over to him in the second half of the season. I think he's going to be a really good player for Forest, and I think he's great to have in the squad.
Okay. That's a great observation, actually. I hadn't considered that, because obviously Bolly's not going to go on forever. He's one of the veteran players in the team. So what have you done then in terms of formation without revealing the other players right now? Have you got a 4-3-3?
I have. Yeah, I have.
Me too.
And with I think the idea that would be a 4-5-1 in defence, and quite fluid in transition, I think.
Okay, so talk to us about your three in midfield. How have you got them organised, and who have you chosen?
Okay, so I've chosen Ryan Yates to sort of sit just in front of the back four, and Marshall with Danilo and Morgan Gibbs-White, both of whom can go forward and back, who've got engines. I think we sometimes, when we talk about Morgan Gibbs-White, we talk about him going forward, we talk about his threat. We obviously want him to be able to produce more goals, but he was, I think, joint highest assists in the Premier League last season with 10. But what we don't talk about Morgan Gibbs-White enough is his absolute sort of determination defensively. He's like a dog, and I love that attitude that he's got, sort of getting back. He plays with his heart on his sleeve, and we'll come to it, but perhaps but I think he's got that captaincy attitude to him, and I think if he left Forest, he wouldn't have that. He's got that sort of seat at the top table at Forest. So that's my midfield three.
Interesting. I like the observation you make about Morgan Gibbs-White. I've had similar thoughts. It's almost the way he plays, and nobody freak out here. I'm not suggesting he's this quality yet, but the way he plays is almost kind of Rooney-esque.
Yeah.
You can expect him to deliver offensively, but if the ball gets turned over and it's sloppy and the team need help, he's not going to stand there and shout at people and be like, you do your job. Instead, he gets back and pitches in. Yeah. And I love that. I love that determination, that willingness to give it all from the team. And of course, once we get done revealing our starting 11s, I'm going to pin you on who your skipper would be as well. And I think Morgan Gibbs-White is probably going to be in that conversation as well. So we'll come back to that. Some people are going to be unhappy with us. You picked Ryan Yates in your three, and so have I.
Oh, good.
I think he's very underrated, both as a player and his importance to the team. You mentioned earlier, Chris Wood is not only an important player, but he's an important character in the changing room, locker room for our American listeners and viewers. And I think, Yates has that similar influence as well. It doesn't mean he should start. Competition in midfield is fierce. We haven't mentioned, you mentioned Danilo. We haven't talked about Dominguez, Freuler, obviously Sangare's in the mix. You mentioned Morgan Gibbs-White. So we have quality and we have options in midfield. But I think for me, Ryan Yates would start in exactly the role you described. Morgan Gibbs-White, of course, is kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And you and I are going to have to roll up our sleeves and fight it out when it comes to that last spot. You went with Danilo. I'd be interested to hear why you went with Danilo over my pick, which is Sangare.
So Sangare had a really poor season last season. He didn't look fit enough. He was sloppy on the ball, and I wasn't impressed with his attitude playing on the pitch. And maybe that's his demeanour and just the way that he moves. But I didn't think that he looked particularly like he fancied the dogfight that Forest were in. Now, I've read some astounding stuff in local press, online, about how Sangare looks like a changed player, and this was after playing against Chesterfield, Millwall, and Elche. Now, if Sangare looks like a changed player because of a performance against Chesterfield, then that is indicative of how poor he was last season. Now, of course, I hope that Sangare becomes the player that he is believed to be. I'm not a Dutch football expert, so I couldn't pass comment on how good he was from who did we sign him from PSV. I've just been thoroughly unimpressed, and I don't think that a few pre-season games are enough. Now, I did watch the Villarreal game intently. He made some really good tackles. He plays in that Yates position, I think, in front of the defence. He made some good passes, but he was also still a little bit sloppy, Mark. And I'm not writing him off at all, but I'm not willing to jump on the bandwagon to say he's a changed player after a few pre-season games, of which I don't think that you can really judge that. So to clarify, I hope that he is electric, and if he becomes someone that is irreplaceable, all the better for Forest. But I don't think that he's there yet. I think he looks a little bit slow. I think he's takes too much time on the ball, and I think he's complacent and loses the ball, which Forest cannot do as regularly as he allows. So the jury's still out for me.
Producer Dan, clip it. That's a segment we promote with. That's. I mean, you've made a great case. You also touched on a couple of things that I think, there are reasons that I would pick Sangare. I think defensively he does offer more. I'd be concerned about leaving Ryan Yates to deal with that. Deal with the defense.
So you're playing him instead of Danilo. So you've got Yates. Correct. And so are you playing them both sort of next to each other, or are you giving Sangare a bit? Okay.
Yeah, I am. I'm going all Gareth Southgate, I'm afraid. Only for the opening game of the season, but also I feel like, Max and I talked about this in I think in our previous pod, in that when Yates burst onto the scene, if you remember, he was kind of on a goal scoring tear. No, he's not a goal scorer. I get that, but he can pitch in. He does have that ability. He's an 8, I think. He has that ability to get forward, to pick his moments, to connect with the front line, and to help contribute to offense. I don't think he does it regularly, and nor does he need to, or nor is he probably being asked to. I think more Nuno's looking at Yates's defensive capabilities, and to your point,
but Yates is really good at instigating the press, Mark. Because he's tenacious and he's fit enough. He's an athlete. He's an absolute athlete, and I love watching him do that. I remember, and Steve Cooper deployed him to do that quite a few times at home.
You can't do that with Danilo in there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I'm not fully sold on Danilo. I just think he's just shown much more in a Forest shirt than Sangare, and I think that he's only going to develop under Nuno, Portuguese-speaking manager. His English is sort of slowly improving, which is great. I feel that he buys into Forest more. From what I've seen and from what I've heard, particularly at the back end of last season, I don't think Sangare was particularly happy. Things change. He's here to stay. I don't think he's been asking for a move away. He's obviously developed a good rapport with Nuno, and I sincerely hope we see the player that was touted. People were surprised he came to Forest. I want that. I'm just not convinced. And I think Danilo has shown it more. Danilo's got an engine. He's not afraid of a tackle. Yes, he does give the ball away a little bit too often. I think less so Sangare, and so I'm banking on him. But we haven't mentioned Nico Dominguez, Nicolas Dominguez, the Argentinian, who has a new haircut every week. But I think he's maybe got a bit of a tough time of it because he's been a quality player. I wouldn't mind. I think for me, Yates and Morgan Gibbs-White are my starters, and I know that some people think I'm absolutely daft for saying that, but I think we've got to remember that we're Forest and we're not Aston Villa in terms of position in the league. And a player like Ryan Yates, I think, is absolutely instrumental. So they're my starters, him and Morgan Gibbs-White, and maybe Danilo or Dominguez. But I think, I think Dominguez could offer us a lot more if given the chance. What do you think? Do you think we're overlooking him?
Honestly, I would have Dominguez ahead of Danilo. The issue I think with Danilo, though, is he's a young player and he clearly is a confidence player. And now he's been at the City ground, a little over a season, right? And I think he's going to feel like I've done enough. I've shown that I deserve to start. Yeah, and I think it's going to need to knock his confidence not to start. But for me, he wouldn't start. But I think there's a good chance you could see him, opening whistle against Bournemouth, lining up alongside one of Yates or Sangare, and certainly Morgan Gibbs-White in that midfield trio.
Final thing on that, Mark. I think Nuno will start Sangare. So when you asked me, I picked my team, how I picked off. I think he will start Sangare because he started him against Villarreal and he played him for, I think, to about 65 minutes, something like that. So I do think he will start him. I'm not going to be outraged. But I reserve judgment, mate. I just think he's got something to prove for me. And that's just how I feel as a fan. No doubt he's great calibre, but I don't know if he's up to speed yet. Let's hope he will be.
All right, fair enough. All right, so let's go to we haven't actually mentioned Elliot Anderson as an option for midfield as well. But I think initially, if Anderson's going to be utilised in and around that starting 11, it's probably going to be in one of those wide offensive positions, or coming in as a relief for Morgan Gibbs-White. So I don't think either of us necessarily see him starting, certainly in the Morgan Gibbs-White spot right now. But maybe he comes into contention in the forward line. So front three, I have. And this was really, really hard. I love Taiwo. I love him to bits. I think on his day, he's fantastic. His pace, his power, his ability to score a spawny goal as well as a good-looking goal. I think that's really important for strikers, right? Yeah. Just to get something on the end of the ball and get it over the line. And he's shown the ability to score all kinds of goals. Fully fit, full pre-season under his belt, raring to go. Taiwo was a no-brainer for me. But I've got to start with Chris Wood at the 9. I think he's done enough to earn it, and I think he's ready to go. And either side of him, I'm struggling, mate. So I want to go. I mean, head says Alanga and Cho, right? Callum Hudson-Odoi out either side. But I love the look of Jota Silva. I think he's such a good player, and I think he's going to bring a real. Wrong language here, given that he's Portuguese, but a joie de vivre to that front line. I think he's going to bring, a Morgan Gibbs-White-esque flair and real personality to that front line. That's going to be super exciting for fans, particularly in person at the City Ground. So I'm struggling. I think I need to drop either Callum Hudson-Odoi or Alanga to the bench to accommodate Silva opening game, but I don't know who to drop. So tell me your front three, and maybe you can help me out with this.
Okay, so I'm going Alanga on the left, Chris Wood up top, and Callum Hudson-Odoi on the left, Chris Wood up top, Alanga on the right. For me, two things. You're absolutely right about Taiwo when he's fit and firing, but he's not yet, and he's had a slower pre-season. I think they're protecting him. They're really trying to build up his core so that he's less injury prone. But I also think that Chris Wood, Alanga, particularly Chris Wood, Alanga and Morgan Gibbs-White have developed a really good way of playing, and there's a really good level of understanding there, and Chris Wood can continue his form going into the new season. So that's what I think I want to see. That's what I think will happen. Then on the left, I think that Callum Hudson-Odoi is a real confidence player. I think he's loving life in a Forest shirt. I think if he has another good season, he'll get a move to a Villa, a Newcastle or a Spurs. And so he will want to play really well. What I would say is that, so that's what I want to see. I think that Elliot Anderson is going to be the sort of person that he's going to get 15, 20 minutes off the bench, and very quickly he's going to be coming knocking for that starting left position, right? I do think you're right. He can come in for Morgan Gibbs-White because he can play centrally. Very versatile player, can play at left back if we need. But I think if Callum Hudson-Odoi doesn't get off to the start that we want, or that he wants, I think we'll start seeing Elliot Anderson very quickly being that player because he's a proven Premier League player for Newcastle. I really like what you hear us say about what you're saying about Jota Silva. I really hope that's the case. And how fantastic would that be if we've got that such depth in attacking creative players that Nuno is spoilt for choice and can flip things around and really sort of have that high standards in the squad where Alanga and Hudson-Odoi aren't just thinking, I'm nailed on for a starting spot here because we've got those players in and around him. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see the development of that sort of forward line for Forest. But for the minute, I'm going Hudson-Odoi, Wood, Alanga.
Yeah, I think I probably would have to as well. And I think, honestly, I would love to start Silva. I really would. I just don't know who it would be fair to drop. That's more my issue. Because on their day, like Alanga or Callum Hudson-Odoi can be game winners. They've been fantastic. Hudson-Odoi had a purple patch toward the back end of last season where, despite defenders knowing exactly what he was going to do, he kept scoring the same goal. And that just speaks to the quality of the player. So I don't know if they're going to show up for that opening game against Bournemouth. If they both do, same game, I think Bournemouth are going to be in trouble. And that certainly seems to be a safer bet than putting Silva out there, who is an unknown quantity. But then I'm going to contradict myself by saying, given that he's an unknown quantity in the Premier League, perhaps throwing him out there is exactly the thing to do, right? There's Bournemouth defence. So, But it's good to hear you're with me on Chris Wood. He was, when he came into the club, he was a bit of a whipping boy, and then he started to find his feet. And I think he's done fantastic in a Forest shirt from that point on. And I think he definitely deserves to start that opening match. So not much in the way of deviation, mate. A little bit of argument there in central midfield, but other than that, we're pretty much nailed on. Does that speak, the fact that our starting 11s are so similar, does that speak to the quality of recruitment and the players we now have available to us, or does that suggest we don't have adequate depth and Nuno's choices are already made up for him?
It's a good question. I think really it is. I think it's, you got to give credit to Forest recruitment. I think our problem has always been that we didn't have the depth, and now we do. But because we have the talent, I think it's and that consistency. And Nuno's spoken, hasn't he? He said actually his focus is mostly on the players that are still here. Of course, the signings complement that, but he's building that core squad. And I think rather than throwing players in, it's nice to have that sort of core that was around last season that's going to start this season, because they are good enough and they're developing under Nuno, and he's had them this whole pre-season. They seem to have bonded really well. There's a really strong sort of sense of togetherness in the changing room. And so I think what we've done this off season now is that we've developed the pieces around those that can develop and come in and provide that depth when we inevitably get some injuries, which has been a real bane for us since we've been in the Premier League. But it feels less sort of collateral or cataclysmic if we get a big injury, because it looks like we've got then players that can come in. What do you think? Do you think depth is now one of our strengths?
Yeah, I think you summarised that beautifully. And as we were going through the team, I offered up alternatives, right? And in every position, we have alternatives. And they aren't. I think you always, when you're building a squad, you try and build it so that, yes, you have a strong starting 11, but when you inevitably have to make changes, either tactical changes or changes out of necessity because of injury, you don't want to weaken the team dramatically. I mean, by definition, the players who start the match, in most cases, again, tactically, you might make other decisions, but in most cases, they're going to be your strongest players. So if you bring in someone off the bench, that suggests the team is going to weaken somewhat, but you don't want that drop off to be dramatic. And I think in the recruitment Forest has done, when you look at Silva, you look at Anderson, if he truly holds up, Omar Richards is like another great signing. We've got Amar Bomadelli in the centre of defence, along with Bolly as well to come in. We mentioned Dominguez. I mean, that's real quality off the bench. And so I feel like we're in pretty decent shape. I think we could probably stand to bring in maybe one more attacking midfielder and certainly a centre forward. But
it's centre forward for me, and also it's about offloading. Let's get rid of Dennis. Let's get rid of Josh Bowler. Let's get rid of I'm not necessarily trying to be critical or dismissive of them, but let's open up the squad. I don't think that, reduce the squad. I don't think that Nuno wants a massive squad. I think that was one of the things that frustrated him at the beginning, is there were so many players. Even if we get them off on loan and get the wages paid, I think let's have the squad that Nuno wants and let him feel like he's king of the castle. He never will be, because Marinakis is such a domineering figure, and he's the sort of father figure, if you like. You notice in Ryan Yates's interview after he signed his contract, there's questions in there about how important Marinakis is to that. This is a club in his image, and if as long as we're successful, that's going to be fine. But I think there will be time. You've still got to be wise and make Nuno feel that it's his team, and if that means slimming down the squad and getting rid of quite a few players that we've bought, I think you've got to get rid of Freuler, you've got to get rid of Bowler, you've got to get rid of Dennis. Let's do that so that there's room in the bank, if you like, to bring in players should we need to, which I think we do up top.
Let's bring this podcast home, and we'll do that by nominating us our skipper for the season, who should lead out Forest's starting 11 on August the 17th. Put out a rather unscientific poll on the Tweety, I refuse to call it X, about half an hour before we started recording. And thank you to all the Forest fans that weighed in. This is amazing. We had just shy of 200 votes in the space of 30 minutes. And I put out 4 names: Morgan Gibbs-White, Ryan Yates, Murillo, or Milenkovic. I felt like those are the 4 best and most likely candidates for skipper this season. And I think whichever of those Nuno chooses, I'd love to see maybe a couple of them be assistant captains as well, because I think there's real quality there and there's leadership across the board in those 4 names, and then maybe others as well. I don't want to lead you by the nose here, Max. This is your choice. Who's leading out Forest against Bournemouth?
Ryan Yates. Yeah,
it's
simple for me. Your striker's not always your best. Sorry, your captain's not always your best player. Yeah. I think particularly Morgan Gibbs-White has massive leadership qualities, and he'll no doubt be captain when inevitably Ryan Yates doesn't start some games, because Nuno will shift things around. He might not even start him for the Bournemouth game, and if he does that, fair enough. But for me, when he's starting and when he's on the pitch, Ryan Yates is the captain of Nottingham Forest Football Club. There is nobody else that represents the club better. There's nobody else that plays with as much passion and desire. And I think he's just a real, he's just a proper servant of the club. I'm running out of ways to articulate it. For me, it's a no-brainer. If other people think differently, you're wrong, but fair enough. And that's what I'd say.
Football's about opinions. They're not wrong. They're just, they haven't seen the light yet. But okay, so Yates doesn't start against Bournemouth. Sangare takes his place. Who leads Forest out then?
Gibbs-White.
Okay.
Is he your second? I think Murillo's too young. Milenkovic hasn't been at the club long enough.
Yeah, no, you and I are in lockstep on that one. Milenkovic, I do like. People are starting to make a case for Milenkovic, and I actually do like that. I think that would be, but with him being so new to the club and with there being established leaders there already, it just feels to me like a boat you don't need to rock. So I'd like, maybe if we're going to have 2 assistant captains, I'd like Milenkovic to be one of them, Morgan Gibbs-White to be the other, and Yates to be the team captain. We, however, are not in agreement with the nearly 200 fans that voted in this, again, unscientific poll. Milenkovic got 8% of the vote, Murillo just 2%. Yates got a healthy 21%, but Morgan Gibbs-White, the absolute winner with 69% of the votes. So there you go.
Fair enough. I don't think it's a bad shout at all. Look, he is a leader. And I really think he loves the club. I feel like there's that ownership that he's got, that swagger, which I love. And so I ain't got a problem with that. But for me, it's Ryan Yates,
Okay. Well, I can hear Max Hayes screaming at us all the way from Turkey, because I think he expected this to be at most a 30-minute pod. And I think we're over 45 minutes now. So it's a bonus edition. You're welcome, viewers and listeners. This probably will be the only time I get to host it. So I was filling my boots, and I certainly enjoyed doing that with you, Max Scott. You're a fantastic guy to talk Forest and football with. So thanks so much for doing that with me today.
Yeah, mate, it's been a pleasure. You dragged me away from the beach, but I've enjoyed it more. So thanks. Yeah, thanks for the chat as ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, it's early morning for me. So when we get off the pod here, I will begin my work day. So you're at the beach, Max Hayes is at the beach, and I'm chained to the desk. There's something wrong with that picture. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Garibaldi Red podcast. Thank you to producer Dan as well for guiding me through the process. Certainly appreciate it. Max Hayes, your regular host, will be back here next week. I know he has a couple of special episodes lined up for you guys. And then, of course, the Premier League season will be upon us in no time at all. But from Max Scott and myself, Mark Turner, it's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.